What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are here. We've reached the peak of the mountain at the end here for this series on the Apostles' Creed.
That's correct.
7 weeks, Dave.
I got mixed feelings about it because it also means that it was a summer series, that the summer is over, even though we still got hot August in front of us.
Oh, kids are in full grieving mode right now. They just realized, at least my kids, we do our weekly calendar, and last night they saw on Friday next week that school, and they're like, this is our last full week of not having school. And we're like, kid.
I know. It's about to start. And that means a lot of stuff starting back at church, too. And we'll have a time to talk about all of that. But let's get started on the sermon, shall we?
Let's do it. Well, Dave, let's jump into it. Let's skip the banter. Let's skip the stuff. Let's jump right into this.
Yeah, we've had a
series.
7-week series, which I've enjoyed doing it, and I've gotten really good feedback from. So I'm trusting that it's been helpful. That each week when we do that, it just won't be something we do, from rote and without giving any thought to it. As we say the Apostles' Creed, as we are affirming our faith. That's kind of a big word, affirming our faith together. That we can do that with some confidence and realizing that some of the things that we talked about might have raised more questions than they answered. But at least we know where we are, and we can be confident in some parts, and we can realize we got to do some work on some other parts. So that we can, have more confidence as we are affirming our faith together. This ancient creed that's been with us almost from the very beginning of the Christian Christian movement.
Yep.
I start to say Christian faith, and then a movement of the same. Christian faith that Christians throughout the centuries have used in worship. And so this week we got to the very end, and it was that I believe in the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. And so those are three pretty big things to look at, particularly the forgiveness of sins.
Yeah.
And it's something we say a lot. It's something actually that comes up in sermons a lot, this idea of forgiveness. And I think I told the congregation on Sunday that if I'd had an extra week, I would have done one standalone sermon just on forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because it's so multifaceted what we're unpacking when we say that. Certainly we are talking about the forgiveness of God to us, the forgiveness that we received, the forgiveness that Jesus gave for us on the cross.
Yeah.
But it also implies the forgiveness of others. We live sort of in this communal state where we have to practice forgiveness. We have to offer forgiveness. We have to receive forgiveness when it's people ask us to forgive them, and that can be a very difficult thing to do, to forgive others. But because God has forgiven us, then we need to live in sort of an attitude of forgiveness, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes we approach forgiveness as one of those things where we're admitting that it wasn't as bad as it was or whatever. But honestly, I think when we talk about forgiving somebody, we're actually almost taking our own shackles off about the situation and truly handing it over, because there's so many people I know that have just stayed angry about situations, that have stayed hurt about situations. And I think they're almost doing more damage to themselves than they are trying to find justice for the other person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and as I said, it's a deep subject and many different aspects of that we could talk about, But living with this attitude of forgiveness, understanding, first of all, that forgiveness is a gift. Mm-hmm. It's not something that we've earned. The forgiveness we receive from Christ is forgiveness. And I used two stories from the Bible. One coming from Luke's gospel, and it was a story that's in all four Gospels, actually, but it's the one where the woman comes in and she has a bad reputation, but yet she has found Christ. But she comes in and to express that love and gratitude, she takes this alabaster jar and a perfume and anoints Jesus' feet. And there's this picture of her coming in to this room where these people are having dinner. In this case, Jesus is at the home of Simon the Pharisee, who has invited him to come and be a guest. And she comes in to this, so you can imagine the gasp and what's this woman doing here? Breaking some sort of societal rules of this woman coming around men. But she, begins to anoint his feet with this perfume and to dry it with her hair. And the guy that invited him, Simon the Pharisee, not Simon Peter, but Simon the Pharisee says, if this guy, or is thinking to himself, if this guy really knew who this woman was that's touching him, that, he would not, let her in, do that.
Right.
And so Jesus tells this parable about this guy that was a landowner, and there were people, or money lender, and there was two different people that owed him various amounts. One owed him, a moderate amount of money, and another person owed him a great amount of money, and he forgave them both. And so he asked him, who is going to love the money lender the most?
And so, the guy with the greatest debt, right?
It's the logical thing.
Right.
And so if I'd had time to unpack that, I think what Jesus was getting at, that Simon is a Pharisee who really thought that he was earning his righteousness by keeping the law, that he really didn't see himself as a person who really needed very much forgiveness.
Right.
But this woman who comes from this, bad reputation that everybody in the community is kind of shaming her, she has a lot to be thankful for and to be grateful for. And so, it's interesting because it speaks to those people who may be following the Christian faith, but really think like, well, I've got it all together. I live a very moral, decent life. I come to church. I do all of that. And they don't really understand the deep need that we all have for the forgiveness of God, and then in turn to give that to others. And so then I skip to another parable that I love teaching on, comes from Matthew 18. And it's a parable, again, a very similar parable. There was two people this time that, that are involved. But one person at first who owes this guy $8 billion in today's terms. $8 billion in today's term.
Yeah.
And so as they do in that time, they couldn't pay it back, so they're going to throw him into debtor's prison. And he begs mercy, and he is given it. Mm-hmm. And so, and you know the story. Then he goes right out, and he finds this guy that owes him some money. And it's not very much. It's about 2 months' salary that the guy owes him. Something that he could very well set up payment plans and pay him back.
Right.
And so the guy that owed him money, comes to him and says, like, have mercy on me. He said, I can't pay you back. And he doesn't show mercy. He has him thrown into debtor's prison. And so why would he do that?
Yeah, after he was just given
he's just been given
$8 billion worth of forgiveness.
Why is he out there trying to collect a few thousand?
Yeah.
And my theory on it is that he did not feel forgiven himself. And so he is out there trying to collect money, get some money, so that he can, get the money to repay this impossible debt to repay. And the point
you think
is,
that maybe he was just like living into that so much that it was like all he knew at that point?
He had probably lived with the stress of all of that and that kind of stuff. I'm really not giving him much grace because, he should have been more graceful because of what he's received. But he has got into that mindset. And so, you people who are trying to take a ounce of flesh everywhere, you see people like that. And when you see people that are unforgiving out in the world, that are judgmental of others, who, are always looking for the bad. Lots of times, at least in my experience, they're people that are carrying some weight. They are dealing with something. And so the king or the person who was owed the original debt finds out about it. Other people saw it and come and tell him, and so he comes and has him then thrown into debtor's prison. And he says, "So it will be with you if you do not forgive others from the heart." And so that's important. So like we need to give forgiveness as we have been forgiven a great debt that we could not possibly repay.
Yeah.
$8 billion is just a metaphor. There's no possible way that we could repay the debt for our sins that Christ has given us. Then we need to, in turn, the things that happen to us, we need to be more forgiving to others. Make sense?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. And I think this is actually something kind of in my past that I've had to work through quite often is this idea of forgiving myself.
Right.
And I think that like sometimes people have offered me great forgiveness, people have offered me great blessing and stuff like that. But I kind of battle with the idea of deserving it myself,
right.
And I think that used to kind of hold me back as a Christian, as a person and stuff like that. I was always more than willing to give other people grace.
Right.
But my own grace, and I don't know if it's because I was a sports kid growing up or whatever, where it's just like I never felt good enough. I could hit 500 in a baseball season. I'd go, well, why didn't I hit 600 or whatever? You know what I mean? Like there was 8 base hits I left out there or whatever. Like just always very critical of myself. But I kind of had to find this like understanding that I have to be able to receive the same blessings that I'm willing to give, and to learn to forgive myself in a space of like I'm just holding myself again. I'm can't keep going back to this captivity thing because I kind of feel like that was sin, but like I'm the only one hurting myself by holding on to these things longer than
it's not just a switch that you can turn on and off.
Yeah.
It really is. I had a conversation with somebody recently. It's a friend of mine, but and this guy is dealing with a lot of childhood trauma, and we all have stuff in our past that he just can't let go of, and and it's I hurt for him. I do, and I don't know how to fix it, and it's not really my job to fix it. I can be there however I can. Yeah. But he's going to have to do some work. And when it comes to this whole idea of forgiveness, particularly, I think sometimes in forgiving ourselves, or sometimes we have been hurt so badly by somebody else that it's just trauma that we can't get over. It takes some work with counselor and prayers and time and all of that kind of stuff. Forgiveness is a big subject, and that brings up too something that I touched on. Is that part of forgiveness and living? We should give forgiveness because forgiveness ties us up, and knots us up. It produces this trauma in our own life, but sometimes it's necessary. It doesn't mean like we're just going to say, okay, you get off scot-free. It does sometimes require us to set up boundaries. And it may be that, like, I have forgiven this person, but they're never going to have any part of my life. And that sounds counterintuitive to a lot of other stuff that I've just said. But sometimes that is the healthiest spiritually and emotionally thing to do.
Yeah.
That makes sense? So,
absolutely. And I know several people walking through that exact thing, and putting up those guardrails sometimes feels very selfish to the person putting up the guardrails, but what you're actually doing is protecting you and the people around you from any future hurt, and you can still forgive somebody who has hurt you and keep those barriers up, And sometimes, we're carrying this thing because we have this broken relationship with this person, and we are the ones who have harmed them, and we need to go to them and ask them for forgiveness. And I can think of several situations in my life where I've carried that around, and when I finally went to that person, and it didn't like instantaneously heal the relationship, but it was like this burden, this debt that was released because of asking forgiveness. Yeah. I've always heard. Sorry, just real quick, one more on that is, I think I maybe mentioned it here before, but every time I hear this kind of conversation, I keep thinking back. I was listening to this guy do like a TED talk or something, and he was talking about trust, and he said that trust is lost in buckets and gained back in drops.
Yeah, it's a great,
you know what I mean?
Analogy.
So it's like when somebody has hurt you,
it's
pouring out that bucket, and for them to kind of get back to where they were before that, you've got these moments, these drops of them making the right choices and stuff like that. And that's why it's nice to put those barriers back up. So you give them space to put some drops in, which is the forgiving part, because you could just cut them off completely, but you still are being safe to make sure that they've earned all that trust back before you just give it to them.
Yeah. And so, one thing I encouraged the congregation to do on Sunday was, as we're saying the creed each Sunday, which just about every Sunday we say the creed, not just let those words pass by, but almost used that as an inventory of where am I with my forgiveness? Am I living a life where I feel a lot of pride that I don't need the forgiveness of God because of all these great works that I'm doing, when we are standing in need of God's forgiveness every day? Because, as we start peeling the onion, we find these fractured relationships in our life that we need to work on. So how are we doing that when we say that we believe in the forgiveness of sins? Then how are we going about making that so?
Yeah.
So it's a heavy subject. And it will come up again. It just comes up naturally in sermons as we go through, because it's such a big part of life. And just because, we live in, a communal, whether it's family or church or business or whatever, we live around people, and one of the facts of life, so we're going to get hurt, and we're going to hurt other people. And so we have to live in this sort of constant state of forgiveness, of asking forgiveness and offering forgiveness. And we do that because we have been forgiven so much by God.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, and it's very true. I even think down to like a simple terms of like with my kids, is that I forgive them quite often for mistakes they've made or whatever. They didn't take out the trash when they said they would or whatever. But there's also times that I've had to go back to them and ask for forgiveness for a way I responded in situations or stuff like that. So, I mean, it's very practical.
Yeah. And so then we moved into another subject as we got to the last two lines. And this was the one week that really, it all goes together in an overarching way, but they're not thematically right on point the way we've taken a section that's on Jesus Christ resurrection and that kind of stuff, or we've taken a section on the Holy Spirit or whatever. But this one, we had the forgiveness of sins, and then we jump into these last two lines, which differ in some ways thematically. And so I believe in the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. So what does that mean? What do we believe about that? And I would say how it has, maybe traditional Christian thought has changed a little bit over the years since the Creed was written. And remembering that in a similar sense, and maybe I spent too much time on this, that when we talked about how the cosmology, the understanding of the universe and how it works has changed from when those original people that sort of wrote that and what they would have believed about it, and how we have changed that. They're still essentially the same things that we're believing in, but it has changed in some detail.
Right.
And so Christianity came out of Judaism. The first Christians were Jewish. The people who wrote the creeds probably had a strong Jewish background, and we're only talking about a generation or two around from it just being Judaism. So what do Jewish people believe about the resurrection of the body? And again, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination on the Jewish faith. I know what I've read, I know what I've had discussions with, and I do know that it's a lot more nuanced than how I'm stating it here.
Yeah.
But in a general sense, the way that I believe that those early people, when they talked about, I believe in the resurrection of the body, they were thinking about a literal physical resurrection of the body that, so that, and N.T. Wright, I read some stuff by him last week, getting ready for this. He said, look, if you could see the way that this has evolved and changed, look at the artwork. And so when artists, particularly like, the early centuries or into the Middle Eastern century, we're writing about the final judgment that we hear about in Revelation. They have pictures of like people coming up out of the graves that are half skeletons and their skin is coming back on. And, it's sort of like I said on Sunday, it's kind of like the zombie apocalypse.
Walking Dead.
kind of thing. And so that is actually what they were believing.
Yeah.
And so, but I think, and I don't know how they were interpreting what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians in those first centuries, or through the Middle Ages, actually. N.T. Wright says, by the time you get to Michelangelo and the way he does his art, you don't really see that anymore. And so Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, chapter 15, the whole thing is about on this resurrection, final resurrection. And he talks about, like, if you plant a seed, that, it has to die. We all have to die. So if our bodies are like seeds being planted, and he said, it comes back different. There's a flower, and so he talks about that. We die with our perishable bodies, and what is resurrected are these imperishable bodies. And so, in a sense, as the Christian faith was spreading more into the Greek world, where there was a big emphasis on the soul, the emphasis became more on where does our soul go when we die?
Yeah.
And how are our souls resurrected? I do believe that what they're meaning is that and I don't know. It's a mystery, but that we will. There is a resurrection of the body, but it is a new and different kind. It's not our old bodies coming back on our skeletons.
Yeah.
It is. We are giving a new body, an imperishable body from that. So there's a lot of mystery in that. I don't pretend to know it all, but that's my understanding. Is that, like, if someone's cremated, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
It's like we've sort of moved away from that. And I knew, I know some old timers that don't do that because when Jesus comes back, they're going to have their skeletons or whatever.
Right.
And so it is kind of a complicated part of the Apostles' Creed, but it is something that we profess that there will be a time, and I think what we're really saying is that all things are going to be made right. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and we'll be given new bodies to live for all eternity with Christ.
Yeah.
And we're not. So that we have that final line, I believe, in the life everlasting. And we're not just talking about time that never ends. We're talking about that God is going to set everything right. And so we'll be living in a world where there is no disease, there is no sin, there is no sorrow. We now have bodies that will not feel, the perishable things that we feel today. Anything to say on that? I know that's kind of complicated.
It's kind of hard to add in there because it just reminds me of like that old song, the I Can Only Imagine, because it's kind of like there's so many ways that it could happen.
Yeah.
People much smarter than me have argued about this stuff for so long, and who knows? You know what I mean? Like, because I know some people would say that with the new heaven and new earth, they think that there's going to be a new physical place here put on this planet that we'll all go to at some point or something like that. And maybe, I guess,
heaven comes here. That's according to Scripture. So, I don't know. There is mystery in that, and so that's where our faith comes in. The important thing, I was having a conversation with Chip Wilson, another preacher here after one of the sermons, and he was talking about, like, I don't know what's going to happen when I die. I just know that when I wake up, I'm going to be with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I think, as simple as that sounds, that's pretty profound.
Yeah.
That is. So what we are professing in those last two lines is that we do believe that there is this life everlasting.
Yeah.
That when we die, that's not it.
Right.
That we will go on to live for eternity, and I think it's an encouraging thing. I think it's good news that we would have new bodies, immortal bodies, bodies that aren't going to be, they're going to be imperishable.
Yeah.
And so whatever form that looks like, and I don't know. It's all they had to deal with is what they knew back then, and so it was bodies sort of regenerating. We'd have the same bodies, but I don't know. But I love that. I love that. I love that ending part. Paul says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will be raised."
Yeah.
And so, that's what we're from believing that this isn't all there is. That there is Jesus went to prepare a place for us, and if he went away, then he would come again, so that we might go there also. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's crazy to think. I've had some fun and silly conversations thinking about, like, well, what do you do for eternity? Are you going to play baseball with the Babe Ruths? Are you going to, is life going to be like this? Or because some people would say, like, you're just going to go up there and you're going to worship, and you know what I mean? Like, that type of God's going to be there with you, but is it going to be societal, where we're walking around and Jesus is like, "Oh, Jesus, what's up, man?" Or
these are things that we don't know.
Yeah.
These are things that are only hinted at Scripture, and if we find somebody who has a fully formed theology of what it's going to be, I would be a little suspicious of them.
Take it with a grain of salt.
We just have to take it with the faith. We are to be faithful in our work here, and what comes next, will be a joy and a wonderful and blessed thing, but there's mystery.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Dave, I think I speak for us that this has been a great series. I think I can also say from the feedback I've heard too from people, and I know that you've heard that this has been a meaningful series. So thank you for taking the time and prepping all that. I don't know if people say thank you enough to you in that space, but thank you for guiding us in this. And I do hope for anybody listening that you remember these last 7 weeks of what we've talked about as we say this weekly, and let it kind of resonate and sit with it in your heart, and let it be something that impacts, where this isn't just a set of words that we say for 2 minutes on a Sunday, but it's something that continues to guide our faith, how we believe, but also helps tell our story of why we believe what we believe and stuff like that. So
it's important, it is our Orthodox Christian faith. In just a little concise creed that we say.
Yep.
There's more to say about it than's there. There's lots to ponder about it and read and study about it, but within just a few simple sentences and 35 seconds in worship, I think it's an important exercise for us to do each week.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, guys, again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I don't even know what episode number we're on, like 160 or something like that. It's up there. And you guys have been with us.
We need to watch it so that we can celebrate when we get to 200.
I know, yeah.
I think it's a few months away, but yeah.
I agree. But so thank you guys for watching. Thank you for participating. Give us any feedback in the Facebook, YouTube, and down in the comments section or whatever. We love to get that. And without any further ado, Dave, where are we going next?
Well, this week is back to school.
That's right.
So we have a lot to do with that. Your daughters have already commiserated that's happening. But we're going to do a lot of things around that in the service on Sunday as we're celebrating that with them, and this new adventure that all these kids are on. And so
bring your backpacks.
Yeah, we're going to have the blessing of the backpacks, which is a traditional thing we do every year. We're doing the blessing of the third grade Bibles, which is a traditional thing we do with kids when they get to third grade. Is to present them with the Bible. So that'll be a part of the service. and it seems like something else. Well, it's promotion Sunday. So whatever class they've been in, some of them may be staying in the same class because it may be one that spans across a couple of years. But a lot of the kids will be going up to a new class.
Yep.
And you have some kids coming into youth group.
Couple kids going into youth group.
They did. My daughter my granddaughter is in the nursery, and so they had a party for them last week because they've got some kids that are graduating out of the nursery, and so they did that. Now my granddaughter's 6 months old, so she'll
be there for a while.
she'll
couple
be there
more
for a
years
while.
at least.
But yeah, so that's all going on, and but I'm also using that because that is a good time for us to make goals for ourselves.
Yep.
As the kids are making goals and trying to get into a rhythm of life, it's a good time for us to kind of recalibrate it too. So we're going to look at discipleship.
Very cool.
And setting some goals for ourselves and in our own discipleship as we're growing as a congregation this next year. So I think it's going to be a fun Sunday. It's going to be a good Sunday. And then after that, I guess I'll talk next week. Well, I'll go ahead and say it. I'm going to be doing in August a sermon series on the Book of Ruth. It's 4 chapters, 4 weeks, and so it's a great story. So I haven't done a sermon series like that in a while.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to doing that.
That'd be fun.
So,
That'd be fun. All right. Well, thank you guys again for watching, and we'll catch you all next time.
All right. God bless everybody.